Hello and welcome to episode 209 of Stand Up. Joining me today, former FBI Special Agent, a guy I think's an American hero, Ali Soufan will be my very special guest. I'm Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the show where every day I interview brilliant guests about important issues, and we learn together, as well as get to know each other and support each other through these crazy times that we are now in. So many ways to do that, but the most exciting new way is the Discord chat, which is basically ongoing 24/7. We should probably put a section in the Discord chat for insomnia, those of you that are having trouble sleeping, which is probably all of us. Actually do pretty good. I took a nap on Tuesday at like 7:30 p.m. because I knew I was going to be up till about 2 a.m. And I don't know how I do it, but it doesn't hurt that I've got the Shed Studio, the solar-powered Shed Studio. I don't know what to call it. Anyway, here I am. And I'm glad to have you, and very glad to have Ali Soufan joining me on the podcast today as I fade down the band Maggie Pullett and their song Headboard. I got to put a link in the show notes to that band. They are listeners and subscribers, and there are almost 750 of you now. I want to welcome new subscribers Charles Roberts, who subscribed for $10 on Tuesday, and Lynn Truell, who subscribed for $25. Charles, Lynn, thank you very much. That is awesome. Made my day. Always get really excited when I see a new subscription come in. I get an email from Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic if you haven't already subscribed. A lot of great benefits, including tonight, October 14th, 8 p.m. Eastern. It's the Stand Up Book Club with best-selling author and historian Kenneth C. Davis joining us to talk about his new book, Strongman, which could not be more relevant than right now. The history of fascism and strongmen is something we all should know about as we see so many of the hallmarks with our president. And there are, by the way, I think 20 days left until Election Day, and lots to talk about regarding that. What are you doing, if anything, to volunteer? Are you sending money? Are you phone banking? What are you doing? Something that I didn't mention. Are you registered? Have you checked? Have you already voted? Very curious what listeners to this podcast, how you're engaged and what you're doing. And if you know anybody who is a poll worker, maybe you signed up to be a poll worker. What do you think about what's happening in your state? Email me your state situation. Just email standupwithpete@gmail.com and write my state situation, and I'll try to get to some of those and read them on tomorrow's episode of Stand Up. So I did find this soundbite of James Carville, who is a longtime Democratic strategist and pollster. Everybody knows the Raging Cajun James Carville. I don't know what you think of him. You either like him or you don't. I got to know him a little bit when I was working at CNN. I don't think he ever really got to learn my name, but he is a screwy, eccentric guy who doesn't seem to have any F's left to give. And he was on MSNBC with Brian Williams. I think this was Tuesday night. And this is what he said when Brian Williams asked him about if he thought there were any long shot Senate races that might be won and what he thinks about the presidential race. And I think it's interesting to hear James Carville say all this. What do you think?
James, do you have a favorite reach Senate race that you are personally tracking? And second question, do you predict Dems will flip the Senate?
Alaska. I've been in on Alaska from the start. I don't know. I like Al Gross, and I just told him to go. But look, John Cronin, Texas, is running away from Trump. He goes to Houston Chronicle and says, "I don't think he's done a very good job on the coronavirus." I think the Democrats are going to be very, very competitive in Texas. Yes, I do think that we're going to flip the Senate, and I have been this way for a long time, and I think we're going to have a very joyous and excellent election night. I fully anticipate that. And I think all of the facts just point in that direction. And you're starting to see the state polls are starting to line up with the national polls. The AB site, I go to it every day. I follow it. And it's hard to look at that and to look at, particularly when you look at the timeline, it looks like an alligator's mouth open. I mean, the bottom jaw drops and the top jaw opens more. And I recommend anybody go to the Real Big Car Politics and look at these polling averages. They keep it right there for you. It's easy. You just click right on it. Even a dummy like me can see that. So, yeah, I like that. And
James,
538 and all of them.
James, you mentioned election night. A bunch of us have been stocking up on bottled water and canned goods, expecting this thing to go weeks, if not months. You think enough vote will be in on election night to have an early evening, to have enough of it done and dusted so we'll know a result?
Absolutely. We'll have Florida in election night. We'll have North Carolina in. But that's the three counties that I can look at and say. I think a good bit of Georgia will be in. So Ohio, we're going to know, not only are we going to know election night, we're going to know 10:30 Eastern. This thing is not going to be close. We're going to know early. I'm not in any panic whatsoever. I mean, I'm just on edge because the stakes are so high, but I feel very good about where the Democrats are, and I probably see as much polling as anybody in the country. And if anything, it continues to improve. And, I kind of thought natural gravity would take it down, but that doesn't seem to be happening as of yet. And we got 3 weeks before we go to post, and I'm ready to go. And I think we're going to know. I anticipate opening a bottle of champagne. Brian, maybe I'll share it with you by distance.
Oh, James. Oh, I hope you're right. From your lips to God's ears? God's ears? Your lips with I hate that phrase. Anyway, what do you think of that? I know some of you probably heard it. We're like, stop, you shouldn't even play that. You're going to jinx it. Yeah, don't get overly excited. But I don't know. I heard that and it made me feel good, at least temporarily. So hopefully you do as well. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing everything we can every single day between now and election day, which include, of course, convincing other people, phone banking, giving donations. I already went through it, but voting. And all right, so there's another audio clip that I wanted to share with you, which was making the rounds last night, early evening, after the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, went on CNN with the Wolf Blitzer. And I watched the entire 15 minutes. And it was very interesting. I think it's an important conversation. It's about the COVID relief bill, which is confusing and hard to understand, and trillions of dollars. Where is it going to go? Who gets that money? So important, and so many interests fighting for that money because that's how shit works. And she went on with Wolf Blitzer, and they had a long discussion and argument about it. My question, of course, well, let me just play the end of it. I highly recommend that you listen to the whole thing. I'd love to get your feedback and thoughts on it as I shared it on Twitter and asked folks. But here it is, just the end of it. Very awkward, weird ending. Pelosi versus Blitzer. And it was trending last night.
Democrats who are members of the problem solvers, they want a deal because so many people right now are suffering.
Well, the problem solvers, by the way, don't have any earned income tax credit or child tax credit in their proposal either. But let's not go into that.
Yeah,
you evidently do not respect the chairman of the committees who wrote these bills.
I respect
and
all of you.
I wish you would respect the knowledge that goes into getting meeting the needs of the American people. But again, you've been on a jag defending the administration all this time with no knowledge of the difference between our two bills, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that to you in person.
Right. Madam Speaker, these are incredibly difficult times right now, and we'll leave it on that note. Thank you so much for joining
us. We'll leave it on the vote that you are not right on this, Wolf, and I hate to say that to you, but I feel confident about it, and I feel confident about my colleagues, and I feel confidence in my chairs.
And it's not about me. It's about millions of Americans who can't put food on the table, who can't pay the rent,
and we represent them, and we represent them,
getting by.
Represent
these
them.
long food
and
lines that we're seeing.
Them.
I know
we
you
know
are.
Them.
I'm just saying.
We represent them, and we know them.
As we say,
we know them. We represent them.
Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, as they say.
It is
here
nowhere
in
near perfect.
Madam Speaker.
Always the case, but we're not even close to the good.
All right, let's see what happens, because every day is critically important. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for your sensitivity to our constituents' needs.
I am sensitive to them because I see them on the street begging for food, begging for money. Madam Speaker, thank you so much.
Have you fed them? We feed them. We feed them.
We'll continue this conversation down the road for sure. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
I don't even... Was that nuts? That was nuts. I see them begging on the street. Have you fed them? We feed them. I mean, I definitely sided with Pelosi. I mean, if you just hear the end of it the way you did, I can see how you might thought she was being a little petty when he was trying to end the interview and get the last word. But if you saw all of the interview, you might think a little bit differently about it. And I highly recommend that you do, because it's such an important issue. The COVID relief bill, it means a world of difference for struggling Americans. But where do the benefits go? How do they go? Who gets them? So there's a lot of concern there. And then, of course, you know, this idea that he kept suggesting, why don't you just sit down with Trump? And you didn't hear that in that clip, but why don't you just sit down with Trump and get a deal? And he should know better than to make such a suggestion, because Donald Trump is an unstable maniac who she and we all know cannot be dealt with. You can't make a deal with him. You could shake his hand, make a deal, and go out to the microphones, and he would tweet that you just punched him in the face and didn't want to deal, and you would be confused. His own representatives, whether they're in the State Department or the Treasury Department, have no idea how to negotiate on his behalf, because he is not clear with what he wants. He called off COVID relief bill, remember, last week? He said, we're not going to do it. And then the stock market took a shit and he freaked out. And he's like, you know what, we'll do it. We'll do something for the airplanes and the flying planes and some of the other things. The ships, maybe the cruiser ships, will give them some money. Then, of course, his better angels got a hold of him. His Treasury Secretary said, basically, I'm sure, let me negotiate this with the Speaker of the House. They've been trying to negotiate it, but he is not a equal partner, a stable partner for Wolf Blitzer to suggest that he is. I felt like that was disingenuous, but I also felt like Wolf was pushing her to settle and meet somehow with the president. I mean, it didn't seem like the appropriate thing for a journalist to be doing, to be basically lobbying for one position or another. And furthermore, we just don't know what is going on, as she was trying to make that point in these negotiations. We're not inside them, and we're supposed to trust our representatives. I mean, in an ideal situation, I know many of us don't. Many of you don't, but I don't know. And lastly, clearly she doesn't want him to get a political win before the election, which he would. He wants to put his name on checks. I mean, I think there are obviously some politics at play there with all of this, but I would love to know your thoughts on that as well. And one more thing that I've got to play for you, because, of course, Tuesday was the second day of the confirmation hearings for Amy Coney Barrett. There is a world of punditry out there. I always recommend Mark Joseph Stern and Dahlia Lithwick at Slate, Adam Liptak at the New York Times. Glenn Kirshner is doing great work on his YouTube page and Twitter. So many others. Elie Mystal is great to follow on Twitter. Laura Coates is great to follow and hear from. But, of course, I reached out to our friend Eric Siegel, who's a regular contributor to this podcast and several other shows, has his own podcast now. I'm going to do a longer conversation with him for tomorrow's podcast. But I said, listen, give me a 2-minute soundbite that I can play. And it was a battle because it meant he had to figure out how to record a voice memo. But ladies and gentlemen, Siegel did it. And he sent this to me last night.
I watched the hearings for the last, I don't know how long, it feels like a week. And here's a 2 to 3 minute reaction, which you requested. She's terrible. The hearings are terrible. The Supreme Court is terrible. Virtually everything is terrible. Her answers on the gun case that she dissented in, where she thought that she could second guess the legislative judgment of a state that all felons shouldn't own guns, was terrible. Her discussion about severability, which is this legal concept, if a court strikes down part of the law, what does it do with the rest of the law? She said that issue was not in the first Obamacare case. She said it 3 times. She was wrong every time. The Supreme Court struck down the Medicaid part of the Affordable Care Act, so severability was a big part of that case. She got that wrong. Her evasions on abortion are terrible. She signed a letter saying effectively that Roe versus Wade should be overturned and abortion is murder. That is what she believes. She should have said that. She could have said, I'm not going to promise how to vote. I don't know how I'm going to vote when the case comes to me, but my personal belief is abortion is murder. And if she had said that, I'd respect her, but she wouldn't say that. The Democratic senators, by and large, were terrible. Cory Booker was good. There were a couple others. Senator Whitehouse did a very good lecture, but I think he could have put it on YouTube rather than do it in the Senate confirmation hearing. So everything is basically terrible, and I hope you get this recording. And if you did, then it was a technical achievement. Longtime listeners will understand how hard that is for me. So I'm signing off with that.
All right, the Luddite, the legal eagle, Eric Siegel. He's learning. He's getting better with technology, as am I. Have you seen the new stuff I'm doing here? I got the YouTube page. I'm soft launching again. I mean, the podcast was posting every day there, and then there's a glitch with the host and the YouTube, so I've got to catch up and post most recent audio files. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube if you want. But I posted a video of Pam Keith and I. That was the interview I did last week. A lot of people loved it. Several of you donated to Pam Keith's congressional campaign. She's running for Florida's 18th congressional district against this asshole named Brian Mast, who's the incumbent. Pam is a brilliant black woman as well as a Navy veteran, and she really impressed me and so many others who donated to her campaign. Going to also be hopefully doing a virtual fundraiser with her where everybody will be welcome, not only subscribers, but anybody who wants to join will do whatever work. I'm going to figure that out with her people, hopefully for next week, because it's not going to be too late. She is surging in Florida 18. There's a lot of reasons why we want her to win there. And I just posted that interview on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and search Stand Up with Pete, or I'll connect. There will be a connection, a link to it in today's show notes, my YouTube page, which I'd love for you to also subscribe to. And finally, before I get to Ali Soufan and the great conversation that we had, I wanted to share with you what I think is probably yesterday's most undercovered and really important story that you may have missed. But the Supreme Court came through with an awful decision on Tuesday, allowing the Trump administration to suspend the census count, bringing the 2020 census to a premature and likely permanent halt, writes Mark Joseph Stern at Slate. Only Justice Sonia Sotomayor noted her dissent. The court's decision all but ensures that for the next 10 years, immigrants and racial minorities will receive diminished representation in Congress and state legislatures, giving Republicans an unearned electoral advantage through 2030. I highly recommend that you learn about why that is. Read about it. I'll try to get someone on to explain it, maybe Mark himself, who I just read from. All right, so now time to get to today's featured guest, which is an almost hour-long conversation with former FBI Special Agent Ali Soufan. The origin story of my meeting Ali Soufan is kind of interesting, and you may have heard it before, but basically I heard about this guy who was in the FBI, who was an interrogator because he was interrogating al-Qaeda suspects. I heard about it because there was a New Yorker article by Lawrence Wright, who is a highly respected, very interesting journalist who's been a staff writer at the New Yorker since the early 90s, also an author, screenwriter, playwright, brilliant guy. And he wrote a book based on that article, The Looming Tower, Al-Qaeda and the Road to 9/11. And he won a Pulitzer Prize for it. But it features a lot about Ali Soufan's role in investigating extremist attacks in the Middle East, specifically the USS Cole, as well as his role in interrogating al-Qaeda suspects. I read that article and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try to interview this guy. Lawrence Wright talked to him. He talked to Lawrence Wright. And granted, he's a New Yorker and I'm just a Sirius XM radio show host at the time, a stand-up comedian. But I'm going to try to get to this Ali Soufan guy. And I went about it in the way that I do, very amateur way, but I somehow was able to endear myself to his representative. It didn't hurt that I had some Lebanese background because Ali Soufan is a native of Lebanon, moved to the States when he was 10 years old, to Pennsylvania, I think. And he and I had an off-the-record conversation with one of his representatives present on the phone. It was on the phone, old school. And then we had lunch. And while we were having lunch, by the way, Ali Velshi walked by on the street. How weird is that? And I introduced him to Ali Soufan. It was, of course, again, all off the record there. But that was a really interesting and important moment for me, putting those two guys together, and they have since become friends. And Ali Soufan was just on Ali Velji's show. Anyway, Ali Soufan eventually came out and publicly and started doing media and interviews, including my show. And I also was the instrumental reason in why he was booked on the Colbert Report. You can go back and watch that guest interview. It was great. And I was and am extremely proud of getting him and Aaron Carroll, as well as several others, but those two in particular, as guests at the Colbert Report. So anyway, we became friends, and I would argue close friends, and I would be invited to his home, and I performed for his kids' PTA and his Christmas party that he has, an epic Christmas party every year with a bunch of national security types, media types, and it's always a fun time. And I interviewed him several times. He became a big hit on the SiriusXM show, and I'm so excited to have him on the podcast. Before I hit record, he and I talked a little bit about what was going on with me personally, especially, and I told him that I was actually ashamed and embarrassed to reach out to him and several other people after SiriusXM canned me, and he was really upset with me that I didn't reach out to him, and it was so comforting to hear his words now, and I wish I had reached out to him then. But there is no shame. There should not be any shame in losing your job. Many of you are going through that right now. And if anybody wants to talk about that, I'd love to help you if there's anything I can do or say, because I went through it. It broke me. I was upset. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I look back at it now and I'm proud. And in many ways, it was a gift because we've built this amazing community, and I'm doing the podcast. It's going really well. I'm doing it every day. Very excited to share my conversation with Ali Soufan with you. We start kind of in mid-sentence here because I was recording what I thought was going to be off the record. And as you hear me ask him, can I share this? And he said yes. Then you'll hear a quick jump cut as I jump into the conversation officially. And I highly recommend that you check him out. Check out his books, Anatomy of Terror and The Black Banners, which is a bestseller. Follow him on Twitter, and he's on Twitter at Ali_H_Soufan, SOUFAN. All of that will be linked to the show notes. Of course, subscribe to the intel briefing from his company, the Soufan Group, as well. Here it is, beginning in mid-sentence with Ali Soufan answering a question I had about Russian interference and what many of the former and current feds that he knows thought about it.
Thousands of accounts that suddenly became like Deplorable John and Deplorable Jane, and you have all these thousands of social media accounts that were very pro-Trump, but also at the same time very white supremacist type, ultra-right type. And we found out that a lot of these accounts, the greatest majority of these accounts, were fake. All of them were Russian accounts. And the pictures of these accounts were all taken from dating sites in Europe. So they created a movement that was on the fringe in America, but because of social media, they empowered it and they made it mainstream. Now, what we're going to see in 2020 is building into that. Now, who helped them bring it to mainstream? There is a bridge between the cybersphere and the mainstream. And that sphere was Trump and his people. They repeated the fake stuff from Russia. Right. And now that exists. And that's why he's very hesitant to condemn them. That's why he tells them stand by, because he knows that these are the people that he might be using also in the election, either to intimidate voters or to suppress votes, or if he refused to leave the office, to create chaos and problems. If he said, hey, you know what? I didn't lose. The Democrats stole the election with these all fake ballots. Then you will see the Proud Boys and all these different militias on the streets saying they're going to protect American democracy and they're going to protect Trump. This is the thing that scares the shit out of me at this point.
How many of the people that you talk to that are either still in government or now, former is there a aggregation of ideology? Do most people think the same thing about Trump and the threat that he poses and how he might be compromised, or are there a lot of differences?
No, to the most part, you'll see a lot of people feeling that, I know people who still on the inside who actually voted for him in 2016. Mm-hmm. And they believe that he will be, it will be a severe danger to our democracy and our future if he get elected again.
Oh, they voted for him, but they've since changed their tune.
Yeah. They believe that it will be dangerous for our government and our way of life.
Do you know anybody is there anybody that you respect their knowledge on just general national security threat matrix that still supports him, given I just look at the FBI. I was saying this to, who was I saying this to yesterday? And I think about, a reporter, Sarah Kendzior, the generational mission was, before extremists, it was Russia a lot. And now a lot of those guys are still in or on their way out. You would think that they would be horrified by Trump Russia. Is there any truth to that?
Everybody. I mean, the CIA, the FBI, NSA, a lot of people are. So yeah, they are horrified with what they see, and but unfortunately, he's the president of the United States, and towards the end, the president gives the orders. The president gives the executive orders for these agencies to act. I mean, we're not retaliating against Russia, not because we don't have the power to retaliate against Russia, because there is no order for these agencies to retaliate against Russia's interference, for example. And just 2 weeks ago, Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor, he said, oh, yeah, I talked to the Russians in Geneva, and they said they're not interfering. I mean, can you imagine if Obama said that? They will go crazy about him. Like, what are you talking about? Right. Oh, believe Russia, believe Putin. But that's exactly what's happening, and none of the Republicans are doing anything about it because they know they are on the receiving end of Russians' efforts. And that's why they are laying low, and they are okay with it. But I think the moment that they lose the House and lose the Senate, they already lost the House, but they continue losing the House, and they lose the Senate and they lose the presidency, I hope the true leaders in the Republican Party will basically have the courage to stand up and say, you know what, crazy is not the way forward in America. And we need to go back to our American traditions, political traditions. And let's see what happens after that. But I think we need to unify the country again, because this guy divided it like nothing else. I mean, it's like when you're fighting with family members and you say a lot of bad things to each other. And then probably you can, shake hand and make up and everything. But towards the end, you cannot take back everything that has been said. And that is what's happening after this guy. Yeah. A lot of things have been done. A lot of things have been said. And it's very difficult to become a country again and respect each other and see eye to eye with each other on issues. We don't agree on anything. We don't even agree if Russia is the enemy or not. We don't agree on anything today in the United States. We don't agree on white supremacy, in heaven's sake. This is like 70 years after Normandy. We don't fucking agree on Nazis.
Well, we don't recognize them, that's for sure.
Yeah, well,
I mean, history is not something that I think a lot of people really understand. Can I use everything you just said? I've recorded on the audio. Did you say anything off the record? Yeah, I didn't think you said anything that's in any way. All right, there he is, sitting in his home with a ball cap and a hooded sweatshirt. The great Ali Soufan, who I've already talked all about in the introduction. And I do want to say on the record that thank you for being such a good friend to me. I know I haven't talked to you that much in the past year since a lot has changed in my life. But we just had a great chat, and I love you, and I'm psyched to see your face here on Zoom.
Same here, brother, and I'm glad you're back.
Lots to talk about with you. A lot of listeners have said, when are you going to reach out to Ali Soufan? You've got to get him back on. So much to discuss. But let's talk about just the kind of, I think the phrase might be threat matrix. What do you say in national security when you're talking about all the different threats that a community, a state, a country a planet might be looking at, because I wanted to discuss how things might have changed for you and your company from foreign extremism to domestic extremism and how you look at that threat matrix. Can I use that phrase even though I'm just a comedian, podcaster?
That makes you more qualified to use it than the people who supposedly Look, it's great to be with you again, my man. Look, when we look at what's going on today in the world, I think there is, and in the United States, I think there is three main threats. There is the very first obvious one, which is this global pandemic that's happening. And some countries are dealing with it better than others. Unfortunately, in the United States, probably we're dealing with it horribly, as the numbers indicates and speak for themselves. The other one is, we have an election in the United States, and the issue of foreign interference is really huge, especially by countries like Russia and China. They are trying to interfere in American politics. They are trying to create more divisions using social media platforms, using cyber hacks to do so, building on what Russia successfully did in 2016. And the third element of the threat that we have, which is the most prominent threat to the homeland, is the rise of white supremacy and the rise of domestic terrorism. So this is basically the three main elements that when we speak about the United States, we're focusing on. In the world, there is definitely similar threats. The pandemic is not an American phenomenon. It is a global phenomenon. But also, I think the most imminent threat that we have is basically global warming. Unfortunately, only the United States is not part of the multilateral agreement on global warming after we pulled out from the Paris Agreement. So this is really significant. This is probably one of the biggest problems that we're going to be dealing with for generations to come.
Yeah.
And the other one that is also have American connection is our leadership in the world. I think the most dangerous thing that's happening today, that the world order is going rudderless. This is the first time we're dealing with global crisis without a global leadership, and the United States is nowhere to be found. And the American diminishing role in the world is not because somebody else kind of outsmarted us in kind of pulling us from the primacy of world order, but because it's self-inflicted. We basically did that to ourselves. So, the world is changing. The world is moving. They're not going to wait for America. They are moving ahead with a lot of these issues. And unfortunately, it seems that we're not being part of the discussion that's going on in different places, regionally and globally.
That's really interesting that you cite rudderless world order as a deep concern, because the opposite, I guess, is chaos. People hear world order and they hear like new world order, and they hear some kind of conspiracies of that the wealthy elite have rigged things and so on. But the bottom line is, while there are always problems with world order and who has advantages and who's using more resources, the opposite is chaos and extremism and violence, and obviously all the effects of climate change that come with all that. Is that the opposite? If I were to simplify it into black and white, the opposite of world order.
Chaos. Think about it. After World War II, there was a world order that was established, right? And and then we have the Cold War, and then the United States emerged victorious of the Cold War in 1992. And then we had something that they called globalism. And basically, globalism was really good for almost everyone in the world. I mean, we're not saying it's perfect. We're not saying the world order that was established by the United States is perfect. Definitely, it had a lot of problems. But at the same time, it benefited everyone. Remember, it is that system that made China be an economic power. We allowed our adversaries and we allowed our friends to benefit from that system. Now, that system was democratic in nature. Unfortunately, today, that system is getting weakened. Our alliances getting weakened. We pulled out unilaterally from the Iran deal, leaving our allies in it. We tried to impose sanctions again, snap the sanctions back through the UN. We lost horribly in the UN Security Council. That gives you an idea about the power of the United States today when it comes to multilateralism. We pulled out from the climate change. We have a problem with NATO. We have a problem with our allies, but we're basically sucking up to dictators around the world, from Putin to Xi to a lot of the other dictators that we have now roaming the planet. So then we have a situation today that the United States is not going to be in a position to lead. And if the United States is not in a position to lead, who? China, Russia. Do you really want to be part of a world that's dominated by Putin or dominated by the Chinese Communist Party? That is what's going to happen when we pull out from the world. Somebody is going to fill the vacuum. And whoever is going to fill the vacuum is not going to be good for our way of life, for democracy, for liberal democratic systems around the world. And that's why the Europeans are very nervous about the path America is taken. And that's why this election is significantly important, more than any other election in our lifetime, because it will determine what path America is going to go in. Are we going to go back and reclaim America's greatness, or are we going to descend into an autocracy? And this is up to the voters to determine in a few weeks.
How hard do you think it is for Joe Biden to, if he's elected and there's not a mad chaos around it and questioning around it, let's say it's something, quote, normal in terms of transfer of power. Let's just say that for sake of my question. How hard is it for him to step back into the Western Alliance and the climate change treaty, and obviously Iran, I think, is probably the most complex of those things. But how much it feels like our foreign partners and friends and even adversaries have just kind of been holding their breath for 4 years with uncertainty. Can Joe Biden just be like, it's okay, I got it now, and he's got a great new Secretary of State or something?
Well, it might, because you know what, the world can give us a pass. You know, everybody has a fluke, and we had a 4-year fluke, right? But so, and they need American leadership. So there's a possibility that we'll be able to fix a lot of the alliances that has been damaged during the last 4 years. We have to keep our fingers crossed, but also at the same time, we have to make a lot of changes because the system is not going to, you know, the old system that we had is not going to continue working if we don't make significant changes to it. And, you know, we need to go back to multilateralism. We need to basically move away from, appearing as if we're bullying people around the world. We need to deal with the Chinese emerging economic powers. Look, we have a couple of things going on. We have the strongest military in the world. That's number one, right? We have the strongest economy in the world, number two. And we have the best education system in the world that produced the most advanced technologies in the world. Those are the three, right? We continue to have the strongest military in the world. But as you know, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from all the conflicts that we're part of, we cannot shoot our way out of everything,
right,
out of problems.
Right.
So this is number one. Number two, now economically, you know, we're not, you know, we have new emerging powers like China, for example, like the EU. They are comparable to our economy. Then technologically, we're not anymore. I mean, the Chinese are way more advanced when it comes to artificial intelligence, when it advanced to a lot of the different technology. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do to sell people that you need to be part of liberal democracies? We have our values, which basically helped us win the Cold War, the values of democracy, the values of freedom, the values of the human rights. These things are not only an American brand. These things are the essence of what the United States is all about. So we have to go back and we have to rule and we have to build alliances based on our values. It's not like you can go and take a Washington Post journalist and cut him into pieces and the United States is okay with it because the thug who cut him into pieces is our thug. That is not going to work anymore, because then why do they need to be with the United States? They can go to Russia, they can go to China. There's more powers that deals with them on these issues. And that's why I think it's extremely important to go back to our values. This is how we need to basically establish American leadership.
Yet, I saw that your tweet, I think, is what notified me that the UN Human Rights Council appointed Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia as nation states or as members on this. I don't know what that is. I don't know what it means, but I do know that they are three of the top worst human rights abusers. I think we're somewhere up there now as well, unfortunately. But I mean, to put them on, what does that mean? And why has the UN done this?
So, I mean, it's becoming a joke. Human rights becoming a joke. I mean, imagine Mohammed bin Salman, who cuts people into pieces. You go in one piece, you come out in pieces after you go to his embassies or his consulate, like what happened with Jamal Khashoggi. You have the Chinese Communist Party. You have Putin, who's freaking poisoning people left and right. Anybody who oppose him, even in England and other places, those people are now on the Human Rights Council.
Well, you mentioned the Chinese Communist Party, but what you didn't mention the Uyghurs, and you're implying, I mean, that's their worst human rights abuse.
Not only the Uyghurs. I mean, look at the guy who was basically, on the top of the coronavirus early on, the doctor, and how they arrested him, and he died in a hospital.
Chinese doctor.
I mean, look. We don't have to say anything when you say the Communist Party.
Got it. Okay, fair enough. Well, I think
that speaks for itself.
No, it's always worth mentioning the horrific things that any political party or country is responsible for. But
this is the thing. I mean, now these people are in the Human Rights Council.
Why would the UN allow for that? Why? It's got to be some kind of trade-off, some kind of pressure, some kind of corruption.
Well, I mean, it's the UN, in heaven's sake. They are members. They probably paid their way, into the council, and we don't have, strong position when it comes to human rights issues, between the United States and our allies and other liberal democracies.
Right.
To stop this tragedy from happening. And that's basically what's going on today.
Let's drill down on one of the issues that you mentioned, try to get to as many as we can. But I really wanted to get your take. You've been talking and looking a lot at the Soufan Group and in your daily email, the Intel, what is it? The Intel briefing, which everybody should subscribe to. It's really great. Ali's organization puts this out regularly, about white supremacists, these guys. What we just saw happen in Michigan, we learned today that the same group apparently was thinking about or plotting potentially to also kidnap the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam. And my first, question to you is former FBI agent, FBI obviously involved here along with the state troopers in Michigan, the attorney general there, and of course the governor. And I have to wonder about the question of how could you explain kind of how these busts occur? I'm always wary of this idea of entrapment. And I'm sure you'll push back against the FBI ever doing that. But usually you look at these brown-skinned Muslim people who are here and basically undercover agents give them everything they need to detonate a bomb except for the explosives themselves. And then they go basically press the button so the prosecutor can make the case. The dummy bomb doesn't go off. Whatever it is, it seems like sometimes the law enforcement set them up to succeed, watching them the whole time. And my question is there any concern about that? These guys seem like such idiots that they would even commit such a plot. And that's the only thing that gives me comfort, is that they're so dumb that they couldn't do it without help, and the help being undercover agents of the federal government. What have I got wrong?
I think there's a fundamental problem with that premise. So you hear through sources or through, monitoring, technical monitoring or whatever, about a group of people. Let's talk about al-Qaeda, and then we'll move to white supremacists, trying to reach ISIS or al-Qaeda to do a terrorist attack in the United States, right? You intercept it. And then you channel the conversation to you. So an undercover FBI agent or a source become ISIS, because those guys have the intent. So a threat is the intent plus the capability. So now you want to see, are they serious about this? We, unfortunately, don't have laws to stop them just because they were reaching out. In order to prosecute them, you need to catch them in the act. Otherwise, things can be covered by the First Amendment. And even if they have weapons, it will be covered by the Second Amendment. So that's why you do an undercover. You do an undercover, and in the undercover, there is a reason. Not one single judge. Maybe there is a fluke, a case here or there, but to my knowledge, 99.999% of the cases, the judges did not buy the entrapment defense. Why? Because the undercover is always wearing a wire. And the undercover is tasked by the prosecutors and by the lawyers to always give them a way out. And they insist that's what they want to do. So that's why.
So they basically, the undercover will give them a way out by saying, you don't, basically saying, not quite like this, you don't have to do this. You don't have to commit this horrible act.
I was an undercover, and I actually told them, you don't have to do it. You don't need to do it. No, we want to do it. We have been dreaming about this moment forever, right? And when the jury hears that and they hear the tape, right? That's why nobody is buying this under. So to the most part, this is what happened because we don't have any other laws to use. You know, if they want to stop with the undercover stuff, Congress need to give authorities and laws for people to get arrested based on intent. Unfortunately, we don't arrest people just and prosecute and convict people just that, well, they had this thought in their head that they want to do something. So that's why human sources, intelligence sources, technical sources is extremely important in knowing what's going on.
Well, I don't know how much you follow. It's a really important answer, and obviously why I knew you'd have a great answer for it. So let me just, how much have you paid attention to this Michigan plot and that group and groups like that? I mean, I don't want to downplay them. You don't have to be a brilliant mastermind to pull off a horrible, violent act. I mean, Timothy McVeigh wasn't. I would argue that Ted Kaczynski was a pretty smart guy, and his ability to do it for so long, get away with sending mail bombs. But
you're talking about guys like, for example, I'll give you an example with the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, right? The guy rented the U-Haul truck. Okay, they put it in the building. They blew up the building, and he went to U-Haul to get the $100 deposit back. I mean,
I know.
They blow up the building. I mean, we're not doing an IQ test for this because, you know, if they score high on IQ, they won't be terrorists in the first place. Right. So,
well, how can you say that? You're the guy who knows. You're telling me that terrorists are generally not that intelligent. My understanding is that you've dealt with some very intelligent ones.
Some of them are.
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's a pretty smart guy, isn't he?
Yeah, but that one of his guys, one of Ramzi Youssef guy who was very intelligent, is the guy who went to get the $100 back from the U-Haul truck, right? I'm not saying all of them are dumb, but I am saying that you cannot just make the judgment. Like sometimes they arrest a guy who's like, oh, well, he was stupid. Yeah, even though he wanted to blow himself up, but he was dumb. Well, you know what? You have to be dumb to blow yourself up.
So,
I mean, it's just like, this is not, we can't say, oh, well, you know, we allowed him to blow himself up because he was dumb. We didn't want to arrest him because of his IQ. So, look, it is very difficult when you are sitting on a desk, monitoring a threat. Your team is reporting things to you about that threat, an operation that's going on. You can't just sit and say, well, you know, I don't want to interfere because people will think, you know, I'm trying to, you know, entrap those guys or whatever. You use every legal tool available to you in order to stop the plot. And that's exactly what's happening with these white supremacists.
Well, the difference, however, is with the white supremacists and the Americans that are being radicalized, in my view, is that when you radicalized al-Qaeda members, ISIS and so on, it was done far more covertly, not that covertly, but, and online with all the new technologies. You can radicalize just with a video. But my view, Ali, is that these people have been being radicalized by mainstream right-wing terrestrial talk radio. If you listen to that, if you listen to Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham and Fox News, and if you listen to the President of the United States, none of them are hiding their views, their strategies, or their rhetoric. The President of the United States said, liberate Michigan. These aren't covert terrorists making sneaky videos on 4chan. You can hear it on WABC every night. That's my view.
No, I agree with you 100%. It's happening in plain sight. I mean, you know, what you see, the violence that you see is the tip of the iceberg. But what created that iceberg is a huge, what created that tip, is a huge iceberg under the water that we don't talk about. But, you know, this is what's going on. To go back to the white supremacists, it is actually more difficult on law enforcement to deal with the threat than with the jihadis, because the jihadis are considered international terrorist organizations. When you're a member of an international terrorist organization or trying to assist or aid an international terrorist organization, there's a lot of laws that can be used, like material support, for example, to stop you. With the white supremacists, we do not have domestic terrorism legislation. We do not have domestic terrorism legislation. A lot of people in America don't know that. McVeigh, for example, he blew up a federal building. I think that's terrorism. If McVeigh's name was Ali, it will be a terrorism attack. It will be a terrorism, operation. Unfortunately, McVeigh was not even prosecuted with terrorism charges. He was prosecuted with mass murder, but not with terrorism charges. Now, the reason is we do not have domestic terrorism laws. So if people are doing something like these guys, you cannot put material support to prosecute them and put them in jail. I'll give you examples. You have a group of people who wanted to basically create violence and attack, create race wars. They were arrested. They were put in jail. And basically they said, look, the reason we have weapons is because, you know, we're protected by the Second Amendment. Everything we say online is protected by the First Amendment. So the judge asked the prosecutors, are you going to levy terrorism charges? And they said no. So he let them go. The only thing that the government can do is put a charge them under the violation of the Telecommunication Act or something. Good luck with that. So that's why we need to deal with the threat and look at what's going on and look at the tools that law enforcement and intelligence need to deal in disrupting that threat from manifesting itself into a big terrorist attack in the U.S.
I feel like there's another concern that's very politically incorrect to talk about, and I don't know where you are on it, but you know, when American law enforcement, if you see something, say something. So if it's a civilian on the subway seeing something sketchy, tell an NYPD tells their counterterrorism force, maybe it gets elevated to, you know, something higher and then something higher and it gets to the feds, etc. But you had all kinds of law enforcement and just the general public looking at every brown-skinned Muslim-looking person with suspicion, every mosque with suspicion, and even people who aren't Muslim, as you know, with suspicion. And that is understandable because the vast majority of law enforcement and folks are white. They're Christian. They're not Muslims. The problem I see, and I don't know how big of a problem it is, but that there are local law enforcement who don't look at these guys necessarily with suspicion, even though they target cops themselves a lot because they're so anti-government. My concern, just to be clear, is that there are sympathizers within law enforcement to the right-wing anti-government extremist point of view.
Well,
you did not have that with al-Qaeda's point of view. No sympathy for moderate Muslims.
This is domestic. A lot of these issues coming from the political culture that we have, the social culture that we have, the socioeconomic culture that we have, the regional politics and environment that people grow up with. And so there's a reason for all these things to happen. And as you mentioned, I mean, you have media outlets that basically talk about these issues
all day.
So yeah, that's part of this. But you know what? Also, many people think that the threat of white supremacy is something you find in Alabama or Arkansas. They don't know that it's everywhere here, even in New York and in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania and a lot of these states and in New England. White supremacy today is not like the white supremacy that we heard of growing up. It is organized. It is part of networks. Some of these networks are connected directly to networks that's connected to networks that's part of the mainstream. They operate in a very similar way, like the jihadis operated in the late 80s and early 90s. They meet with each other across national borders. They have chapters in different countries, in different Western countries. They have their own Afghanistan in a way, very similar to the jihadis, where they go for combat experience, to train, to build networks. And this is Ukraine now. They fight on both sides of the conflict in Ukraine, with the Russians and against the Russians. But when they come back to America, they work together to create race wars and to overthrow the government. This is a reality of things, and we did a report about it, and we mentioned names, and we mentioned the organizations, and we showed their photos. And a lot of people at the time, even in Congress, said, "Oh, we don't want to talk about Ukraine because they are fighting the Russians." But that was the same argument that they did when we talk about the jihadis fighting the Soviets at the time, and they didn't want to acknowledge that Omar Abdurrahman, the blind sheikh, and Ramzi Youssef, and all these guys can be doing something against us here in the United States.
Now that's interesting.
We know that at this point, Russia is supporting both groups, the people who are going to fight with the Russians and against the Russians. I'll give you an example. Atomwaffen Division in the United States.
You're talking about your brief from about a year ago, White Supremacy Extremists Extend Reach from Ukraine to U.S. Military. Is that the report you're talking about that you put out?
Well, we have dozens of these reports.
All right, I'll link to all that in the show notes so people can give. Go ahead, sorry.
And we did a big research about it, a paper last, in September of 2019, and it shows about how they are going from so many different Western countries to fight in Ukraine. So this is the issue. That's what's happening. We have a group in the United States. Literally, they call themselves al-Qaeda. They call themselves the base. The base is English for al-Qaeda. They use al-Qaeda as manuals. They are white supremacists. They advocate for white jihad. Atomwaffen tried to copy ISIS. And these guys went and fought against the Soviets. But when the FBI started, pushing against them here in the United States, we found out that their leaders now reportedly are in Moscow. So that gives you an idea about this threat. That this threat is not only a domestic terrorism threat, it's also a foreign counterintelligence threat, with some of these groups operating as tools to Russian intervention or intervention in American politics and American society.
Ronaldo Nazzaro.
I'm sorry?
Ronaldo Nazzaro, the base.
Yeah, the base. We have, for example, a group called the Russian Imperial Movement, RIM, based in St. Petersburg. They have groups in the United States that operate under their banners. We did a paper on them, on RIM. One of the groups that operate under the Russian Imperial Movement banner is a group called the Workers' Traditionalist Party, led by a neo-Nazi operative. His name is Matthew Heimbach. We have a picture of Matthew Heimbach in St. Petersburg standing next to the Russian Imperial Movement flag, wearing a Lebanese Hezbollah t-shirt. That gives you an idea about the connections that all these groups have with each other. And then we have a picture of him wearing a Nazi uniform, and it's in our report, in Charlottesville. So we need to start paying attention to the threat, because it's manifesting itself in such a dangerous way, not only in the United States, but across the Western world. And many of our allies start designating these groups as terrorist organizations. Unfortunately, we're really behind the 8 ball here in the United States.
Is the thread that ties them together white supremacism?
Yeah.
I wanted to also ask you, and I know that you have been talking about this, just conspiracy theories, specifically QAnon. I've been talking about that as long as I've been hosting a radio show. I've always been worried about conspiracy theorists, especially since the internet has gotten popular, and of course social media, and the way that it all works and the way that it all travels so fast. So how concerned are you with QAnon now that I've just read QAnon is now in Germany? It's in Europe. I thought it was somehow uniquely American, but it's apparently not the case. What are your concerns about conspiracy theories, especially this QAnon movement?
Well, it's definitely global. You have it in Europe, and you have it in places like Japan also, and you have it in Iran, in heaven's sake. This is dangerous thing. But QAnon more, it's basically the result, I believe, of a couple of things. First, the lack of transparency sometimes in our society, which basically allow these conspiracy theories to fester. And second, it's social media. The social media companies and the platforms need to have, to be responsible to monitoring their own platforms and not allowing these kind of crazy, hateful groups of dominating their channels. And finally, now Facebook starts to take them down, but they will go to another platform that allow them to be part of it. Unfortunately, a lot of these things happening because also the platforms, and guess what? The platforms want interaction, passionate interaction, and these groups can create passionate interaction. And as long as they have that, they make money. And it's all about money. It's not about freedom of speech. It's not about democratic expression of, expression. It is about Facebook or Twitter or all these companies making a buck. Right. And they don't care if they destroy the whole society for them to make a buck. And they need to be held responsible for that.
How would you look at Donald Trump, President Trump, and how he is a thread that connects a lot of what we've just been talking about, and not only with white extremism and QAnon and kind of looking the other way on it, much less encouraging it, but also on countries like Saudi Arabia and cozying up with Saudi Arabia and looking the other way with their human rights abuses, from killing journalists to dissidents to the horrific war in Yemen. We're selling them weapons. We like to say bad things about China, and that's fine and fair, but not Saudi Arabia. How would you tie Trump together with all of this? How do you view him as a threat?
Not only Saudi Arabia, Peter. I mean, look at Russia. Look at Putin. I mean, we have the whole intelligence community of the United States. All agencies came with an assessment that Russia was interfering in our politics. And what did he do? He said, no, Putin denied it, and he denied it strongly. So basically, who cares about what you said? He had the FBI director go a couple of weeks ago in front of Congress and says Russia is interfering in the election. And basically, he tweeted back that, Christopher Wray doesn't seem that he likes his job. Right? So, imagine if Barack Obama went and met and hugged and kissed, Kim
Jong-un.
The dictator in North Korea.
Trump literally,
happened. So it's not only that. In the same time, we're having fights with Canada. We're having fights with Germany. We're having fights with Theresa May in the UK. We're having fights with Macron in France. And these fights are so public. So you fight with our allies. You fight with the leaders of the democratic societies, and you cozy up to people like Putin or like Erdogan or like, whoever.
Bolsonaro, Duterte. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is basically a very, very negative message about the United States and the role that we usually played in the world before, and it's creating a lot of concerns, and it's basically emboldening, dictators, and it's emboldening strongmen around the world.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you go because you've given me so much of your time, but I'd love to get, kind of a positive note in terms of, what you think maybe needs to happen with any of these issues. We talked about a lot of different issues. I've tried to tie them together here, but what is your organization doing? What do you think that the federal government, state governments, need to be doing to work together to root out these threats that will always exist? Let's be clear.
Well, I think on a positive note, everyone in the government know about these threats. If you look at DHS, they did the very first assessment ever in the history of DHS. Since it was established on 9/11, they did not do an assessment for the homeland in general. And basically two things came up from that assessment. Number one, Russia and China is trying to interfere in our politics. Number two, white supremacy is the most important threat to the homeland. Okay. The FBI, same thing. The FBI director said white supremacy is the number one threat. The Russians and the Chinese are interfering. The intelligence community is unanimous about its assessment of the situation. Every scientist, every expert in the United States, they know about climate change. They know about the global power of the United States and how it's diminishing. But you know what? As we've seen in the last 3-4 years, it does not matter. If you have a president who's not going to listen and going to do whatever he wants to do. So if you want to change the system that we have, allow the experts to do their job. And in order to do so, vote. Because if you don't vote, you can whine and complain about it as much as you want. Unfortunately, the United States will become a failed country in probably 10 years if we don't practice our right to vote and bring American power back to the primacy of world affairs.
Ali Soufan, thank you for your time. Thank you for your friendship. Awesome as always.
Thank you, my friend.
All right, there he goes, Ali Soufan. And I look forward to talking with him again because I barely got to many of the other issues that I want to discuss, and the big long list of the threat matrix that he listed at the beginning. But I love that guy. I'm also going to probably share the video of that as well as several of my other interviews. I'll start posting them at YouTube. Again, go to the YouTube page, which I'm trying to get off the ground. Stand Up with Pete Dominick is the name of the address of it, as well as you just can click on the link in the show notes to this podcast. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the podcast. If you haven't given a rating, thank you. And, of course, subscribe with a paid subscription and help me do this every day because this ain't cheap. I need your help. I need your support. Can't do it without you. While it's free, it is expensive. So please support the show, be a part of the community, and join us tonight when we have the book club welcoming historian, best-selling author Kenneth C. Davis to talk about his new book, Strongman. Thanks for listening. You're not alone. I look forward to talking to you on the Discord chat and Zoom, anywhere else. Email me standupwithpete@gmail.com. I'll talk to you tomorrow, tonight, and anytime in between.